do you pick the side of craftsmanship, or do you do just enough to make sure you progress? That's agility.
There's a lot of upside if you launch something out, put it out quickly, see what people say, and improve.
There is, like, when we write exams, there is a pass mark, there is a honors or distinction, and there is like full centum 100%. So
Aim to build things that stand the test of time, right?
Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of OK Boomer. Today we have an interesting topic with again very interesting set of people, Shankar, Body, and our own very own host Chris Bot. This topic is very close to all of us because this topic actually needs a balance. I don't think anyone can take sides. People who've taken sides, I can relate to, are either Steve Jobs, who's picked a side and just went on to become a legend. But yeah, let's get into it. We actually want to kind of
Or Elon Musk.
have a chat and discuss about do you pick either whenever we work, do we work to perfection? That is, do you pick the side of craftsmanship, or do you do just enough to make sure you progress and just take the next step and keep the momentum? That's agility. So either do you work with agility or do you work to perfection to make your own craft? Let's get into it.
okay, I can probably talk about uh, agility because I think I identify a little more. Like, I try to be in the middle, but I always end up leaning closer to agility than craftsmanship. So in my head, it is more like like numerically, it's like this, right? So there is, like, when we write exams, there is a pass mark, there is a honors or distinction, and there is like full centum 100%. So what are we trying to achieve for, and what is the effort required, right? Like, even when I studied, like, probably in college, that's a bad example because I didn't really study because I cared about it, but I studied to ensure that I was coasting through. So the minimal effort to maximum outcome was my philosophy back then. So I would try to study as little as possible that will get me past that pass mark, and not within I mean, at least get me a respectable grade. The difference is the effort required to go from that respectable grade to, say, an honors distinction or 100% is probably 5x or 10x the effort required to reach that part. So I picked and chose areas which I was interested in. I would put that effort. Wherever I did not like the subject or wherever I did not care about the subject, I probably didn't put that effort. So that cascades down to work also, where there is a MVP or a minimum viable product that we can ship, like in a product example, or like whatever you do, there is an output for your work, right? So if that output crosses that threshold of what is publishable externally, right? Like, you always have a draft that you may want to read, but you also have a working version that can be shared externally. As long as it crosses that threshold, try to get that out, and anything beyond that can be incremental. Like, you don't have to wait, because more often than not, the time it takes to go from that, say, 85 to 100% is a lot more, like 2x or 3x or even 5x more time and effort than what it takes to reach from that 0 to 85.
My opinion is, I think a lot of times moving fast is more important than craftsmanship. I would basically say that there's a lot of downside to like keeping something with yourself and perfecting it for a really long time, versus there's a lot of upside if you launch something out, put it out quickly, see what people say, and improve. So from that perspective, I feel like agility is a little more than craftsmanship, but whatever you put out, right, whether it's a blog post or a piece of code or an app or something that you design, I feel like you have to be agile, but whatever you put out has to be a rounded solution. It can't be super broken, it can't be super ugly, it can't be super confusing, but it has to meet a minimum bar. That's what I think Body is also saying. And you have to ship fast, meet a minimum bar, and then iterate. That I think is any day better than ideating, keeping the solution to yourself to continue to perfect it without exposing it to the real world. I think there's far greater damage there. Yeah, that's my thought.
Okay. No, I think I'm also on the same side because of nature of the startup environment that we worked in. I think all of us lean towards moving fast and just getting to do things, and all of us take, I think, pleasure from doing things more than ideating a lot. It's just actually pretty important even for me. Uh, but how much of this do you attribute to your own personal self also? Like in life, if you tend to stick to more qualitative approach, I think that kind of reflects in the work also, right? What do you guys think?
Yeah. So I'll take this. Going back to what Body and Shankar mentioned, I feel I actually lean towards craftsmanship and perfection. If you go take a look at my Notion page, there will be more unpublished drafts that are 60%, 80% complete, but haven't been shipped because I feel it's not good enough to go there when it could very well actually have been published and nobody else would have batted an eye. So it's a very personal quirk. In retrospect, talking out loud, I feel like it's actually a downside. But I come from the school of thought that people with artistic flair and the artistic ego come from, right? So if you can get something to perfection, wait until you can get there instead of putting out something that you wouldn't call your best work. And one person in the modern world who shares this philosophy is Wait But Wise, Tim Urban. Um, we have all seen his drawings and his blog posts that are pages and pages long, very contrary to how modern content works. And he talks about how if you spend an extra 6 hours on, say, a little drawing, if you have the opportunity to do that, it could be a very small incremental upgrade to your blog post. But if I can do that, once I ship it, that work is going to stay out there forever. It's timeless, right? So there is no difference between me spending 94 hours on that versus spending 100 hours on that, considering that is what people will know me for.
I think it
I think I
depends
have.
on context. Sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead, question.
I think it depends on context also, right? So I would be totally against it if I'm in a big company and somebody says we have to launch a broken solution today, because there's nothing that's going to change significantly if you launch it 2 days later. In many cases, right? You'd much rather fix those um, small details and the annoying quirks before wait for like a day or two and fix those things before you actually put it out there. Because a lot of times the material impact is much higher if you have whatever you build is like cohesively integrating into the rest of the solution. So I would much rather to take those 2 days and make something better. I think one shouldn't spend like quarters and quarters building things, but I'd be okay with taking 5 6 hours to perfect something than optimize for agility in that situation. Versus, let's say, in a startup, there's no point in working for 3 quarters, not putting anything out, assuming that people will find what you do useful. You would much rather optimize for like scrappiness and like utility there than like perfection. So again, like all things in life, I feel like context matters. Yeah.
I think it's not just context, right? It is also the stage and how big you are. Like the smaller you are, the less stake you have, or the more risk you can take. Your risk appetite is inversely proportional to the reputation or like how big you are, right? So it's if you are small, you can afford to take mistakes, or if you can afford to get up fast. Like it's like the human body, right? Like you can do physical exercises, you can break your bones, and you can heal faster when you're young, but doing that when you're old and frail, probably you will be bedridden for the rest of your life. So that uh, how early on you can do what matters. So I think at some point the threshold evolves over time, right? So when you start, your pass mark could be 50, but if you go bigger, if you build a reputation, and there is a lot at stake, then 50 is not enough to be that minimum pass mark. That 50 may go up to 80. So that progressive evolution also matters.
I think that minimum threshold is your previous pass mark or your previous mark, right? If you've gotten 70 consistently last year, this year like, you have to get 70. That's your minimum threshold to perfection.
Spoken like a true salesperson.
No, that's the thing, right? When you start, like you said, there is not a lot at stake, so you can like take our own situation for example. Like when we started this whole exercise of chatting and putting together, initially we thought we'll keep doing like that's how we started this whole thing. But I think once we progress, make more episodes, once Chris Bot becomes a professional at editing, recording, there'll be some minimum uh, like quality that we will also look at, right? In your production and sound quality, for example, like your minimum quality is your previous benchmark or threshold. Like you cannot go backwards. Like you cannot score 70, 75 consistently, and then because of agility, the next time you score 40. Like that, I think is not the acceptable threshold.
I'll also bring up an interesting example of one of the most popular content creators who have gotten away with being scrappy for a really long time. Farida Bandhan. Uh, if you look at their videos, they want done 500 plus videos, and their quality is exactly or more or less the same as what it was on day one. They have set the benchmark. This is what we are going to do. We are not going to up the
Yeah,
game from here on. Whatever
they're
craftsmanship
consistent.
that you, yeah,
They are consistent at just pass.
I think the expectation setting also matters a lot. What is the first impression of your work for the audience that you're showing, whether it's your manager or your customers? I think that sets the benchmark, and from there on, it's up to you to either focus on quantity, which is I'm gonna keep shipping regularly at faster intervals, versus quality.
Yeah. Let's take Apple for example, right? They are known for the product's quality and like they don't ship unless it's the Apple's way. Like, you really have to be convinced that if Apple has done it, that's the best of the world. Like we can also kind of have a very parallel conversation about what have they lost because of that impression they've created in the market, right? I think for a very long period of time they didn't have a calculator in the iPad because they just couldn't make an app the iPad like couldn't make a calculator that's Apple's that fit Apple's standard. They recently scrapped the car electric car thing because I don't think they can put out a product. Like, they've been working on it for 10 years, but I'm sure in 10 years they have enough resources to come up with an electric car. Like that's not the they have a minimum viable product for sure, but it's not an Apple's benchmark product. So they've just decided to not have it in the market at all if it doesn't meet Apple's quality. Uh,
Probably they scrapped it because they cannot keep releasing newer versions, which will make the previous version obsolete year on year.
yep. Interesting way of looking at it. But that's the thing. Like, if you're known for something, if you have that impression, like this is just Apple in the market, right? But for every individual, I think at work, if you're already known for your craft, then you have to go with it. Like it's very difficult to change the optics if you're already known for your craft of work, and if that is what is expected out of you, and that has benefits for sure. Apple is top 2 or 3 today. I don't know the number, but it's valued more than $3 trillion today. Like the quality pays off. It's not that quality doesn't pay. I think all of us are taking the stance of agility for our own experience and what we've been through, but quality pays for sure, and Apple is typical example of it.
I think one point what Ashwin mentioned in terms of quality being a benchmark is can be attributed or can be seen. Like it's very visible in consumer behavior pattern, like when it comes to shopping, right? So people are willing to shell out money when it's an Apple product, but if it's a non-Apple product or if it's a not so well known or it's an emerging brand, you may think twice. Like the general mentality or mindset is if you're paying that much, you might as well pay to a brand that has credibility over try out something new. And like obviously nobody wants to pay a lot when they're trying something new for the first time.
Do you think
So
that
what
applies to people? Like in a sense, again coming back to your HR view, if someone is sorry, Shankar, I cut you off. If someone is more uh, of a craft person, like if they excel in the top 2 percentile, would you be willing to pay more to hire them rather than hiring someone who i- is not that good with quality, like craft?
I don't think quality of work is that evident or apparent in an interview, right? So this may come into the
Exactly.
picture during performance reviews internally when you have considerable timeline to measure two people's works, as in what their output produced have been, rather than hiring from outside. I think probably the equivalent of that would be well-known brands on the resume versus no-name brands on the resume. Like that's probably a easier uh, comparison than figuring out how their quality of work was. Because if it's external, you don't have visibility over it.
Shankar was initially saying something. I cut him off, so I will
um,
wait for him before I say anything.
I'm not zoning out, but I was thinking when we were talking about quality, right? One challenge I've always had is there's always two kinds of people, right? The people who care, or three kinds of people who care a lot about quality, who care a bit about quality, who don't care about quality at all. And within an org, everybody has these subjective benchmarks. So it's really hard to even go and justify why something should be well crafted because the whole benefit of craftsmanship is completely intangible in many cases. So unlike like I can't go and walk up to someone and argue that hey, if you write this copy slightly differently, it's not going to be perceived by users well, and they won't understand it well. All right. So because they might have a completely different subjective opinion of it, it's really hard to see or for these two people to meet and exchange or come to a conclusion on what is better, right? Or even in any other example, right? Going like that extra 2 miles will really make a large difference in quality, but most people don't perceive it. And even if they do, it's hard to justify to the org why you need to spend so much more time to actually get that detail right. So I've always had that challenge when trying to put some more detail to what I've historically worked on. So I generally feel that a lot of times craftspeople come with good taste, and it's taste that really separates them from the rest of the folks, or how well or how good they are at their craft. So I think, yeah, maybe a riff, but probably just something that came to my mind. I think one of the defining traits of a craftsperson is being able to look up to someone and actually perceive what is really good versus what is really great in the work that they do. And one of the challenging things that person might have is others who may not have the same taste as them. How do they prove it to them that their work matters? That's like a really hard challenge. Unless you're working in a group with a group of people who have the same taste or higher taste bar than you. So that's like a challenge I've always had.
Taste is very subjective, Shankar. Like I identify as the third type of person you mentioned, right? Like for me,
Yeah.
quality has never. I mean, when I am a consumer, I have not. Probably there are certain areas where I consider quality, but in 9 out of 10 places, I don't. Like I remember times like
Yeah, I don't.
when
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
so, I mean, just an example, right? So when I'm reading information on websites like news websites or Wikipedia and stuff, like back when there was dial-up internet, the page wouldn't load. Like I would want to read it faster, so I would just stop loading and just read the text when HTML has not even loaded. Like it really doesn't matter if it looks neat or like I value function over form in most cases, and
You are just
I
proving you are a boomer body.
no, I tend to write off aesthetic. I mean, I tend to write off a lot of what is attributed as craftsmanship to aesthetics and not really value added form.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think your value system is very different from, let's say, my value system. And if both of us work together, there'll be so much friction. So I think for craftspeople, It is
I
always
can vouch
important
for
to
that,
work
Shankar.
towards similar value systems. Huh?
Based on based on a number of side projects that I worked with Body in the last year, I can vouch for that. The difference in value system, and because of the hierarchy, he gets the final say, and I come back looking like I haven't done a great job.
Sorry, I completely missed the question that Chris Bot was talking about. There's not much to catch it.
He didn't even ask a question. He
Okay.
was just saying something.
There's no question, Shankar. You can skip it.
Okay.
One aspect that people would probably want us to touch on is what Shankar just mentioned, right? You are going to be working with people day in and day out who have very different value systems with the same end goal. How do you do that? By minimizing friction? How do you communicate where you are coming from? Where do you find that middle ground? From your side?
I'll kind of add on to it, right? I don't think we can discount either side. Like agility is also important. At the same time, you will have to put in effort to make sure the quality of whatever you do. Like it can be shipping a code, it can be coming up with some content, it can be anything that you do in your work. Quality also matters. You can't compromise one and just say I just don't care. Like, what Body stand is like initially he didn't care as a consumer, which is fine. But when you are the one putting effort into it, both will matter. But you can't let one stop the other. Like that's the bar from like for
I
you to.
completely agree.
Yeah.
Like when I am the receiver and when I'm the giver, my threshold for quality is drastically different.
And depending on what you do, there are few things you will have to make sure it meets minimum like quality assurance. Like I am like I you mostly worked in customer facing roles. So whenever I send something to the customer or my conversations with the customer, I make sure the minimum quality that I work on is little higher, right? Because customer communications, customer is seeing us as a brand, so that matters. But when I do internal communications, when I make a PPT for the team or when I'm presenting something internally, facts matters. Like I don't focus a lot on making sure it aesthetically looks good. Like that's not my focus there. So you will have to prioritize what is more important and which takes precedence when.
I mean, going off the same thread as what Ashwin mentioned, I'll tell you something from my experience, right? So, in many times, I am working on things with a lot of others. Like it's always a collaborative work that I do, where part of my work is input for somebody else. And when that is internal, like there are two steps to it, right? Like you collaborate together on something, and then that final output is presented to somebody else. So in that phase one, I try to optimize for agility, because the sooner I get it out of my plate and into somebody else's, the sooner or the more time that they will have to work. Like let's say I have a week to work with somebody and present something to the third person. If I take 5 days and I give only 2 days for the other person, it's unfair, and it's also like they are getting lesser time to do it. So at that stage, the quality doesn't matter. I would like to get everything to them as much as possible, and they would also try to get back to me with whatever they have, and then we'll probably regroup to do the finishing touches and do some touch up where we enhance the quality before we take it to the final person that we present it to. So this I've seen, because I don't want to be the blocker waiting on perfection. Like I want to get things out as soon as possible. And when the audience is internal, when like the audience is someone that I'm working with and not rather presenting to, it really doesn't matter. Like to me, they're not going to judge me, they're not going to penalize me, they're not going to care whether I have used different font sizes, different colors, highlight, underline, all of that.
I mean, I think all that we are saying, at least Ashwin, me, and Body, I think what we are saying is it can be summarized like this, right? I mean, I don't know if you've seen this image, it's also pretty popular. So you have to be agile enough to build like go from a skateboard to a cycle to a bike to a car, right? There's no point in like waiting for 5 or 10 years to build one car. You'd much rather be agile, put something out there and learn. But I think we're also saying that each of the things that you put out should be really nice and good looking and perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to meet a minimum bar. You can't like have um, like a cycle with one wheel or like a bike without a freelancer, right? So you have to be agile, but what you put out there must meet some minimum bar so that it's useful and it feels like it was done with love and taste.
Shankar, not just meet a minimum bar, it has to be functional. Like I think in this example, the top bar, like none of it is usable, but in the bottom bar, everything is usable.
Yeah, true. I think you
I
can't
think
make
one
something.
aspect of this discussion that
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
yes, I think
There's a
one
lag.
aspect of this discussion that we missed is the danger or like the negatives of both, right? Like what are the pitfalls, like probably analysis paralysis in craftsmanship, or moving fast and breaking things for agility, right? Like I think that is probably one aspect we should talk about as well.
No, moving fast, I would say, like, for at least from my personal thing, it has always helped. The downside of moving fast is just that initially it won't be as good as you want it to be, or the initial traction might not be as much as you hoped it would be. It just like, you will see all of that as you keep the momentum. There is a saying, right? Consistency is key. But when you don't have that enough quality that you might expect, and if you are optimizing for agility, then you should also make sure you are consistent at it. Like, you cannot ignore quality, but also at the same time you don't have that consistency in what you do. So they you'll have to also optimize for that. At the same time, uh, having your own uh, quality minimum, if you have a higher threshold of minimum quality, your work will stand out for sure. Like that, like you asked about the negatives of it, but I'm speaking positives of both sides, right? Which is a negative of the other. Like, when you have a very good qualitative approach to something, the chances of you standing out in a crowd is higher. Like, that's the advantage of optimizing for quality. So if you're in a very crowded place, how are you going to stand out, right? If there's just too many people doing the same thing that you're doing, uh, if you want to stand out from the beginning, I would say you have to make sure the minimum quality is just way higher than the
Yeah,
others.
absolutely. And speaking of move fast and break things, which by the way was popularized by Zuckerberg and Facebook for those watching, Facebook themselves moved away from that philosophy famously like 4 or 5 years back. And their own products, like whether the latest VR gear or the metaverse and Zuckerberg, who can forget that, right? They optimize for agility, the first mover advantage. And where has that left them right now? You don't really trust Facebook's product in either of those categories because the first product that they put out is so shabby that they have lost the trust factor unless they magically 100x the quality in the next iteration. People are always going to consider the alternatives in those categories before trying out Facebook for the second time.
True.
I don't know, I find it very comforting to compare some of the digital work that we do, whether it's software or writing, to like physical things. Like, I always feel like, um, let's say you buy a house, right? There's two things broken that you find every day. Plumbing is broken. 2 weeks later, you find that like a door is not working or something else is broken, right? It really feeds into your perception of like quality and how comfortable or happy you feel in that house. I think when you move fast and break things sometimes, and you do it too often, things break in a lot of places, and you kind of feel when you're working in a large system, right? There's like one engineer breaking something somewhere, and then another engineer breaking something else somewhere, and it all becomes acceptable within their vicinity. But to the end user, right, it feels like going into a house where things are broken, and I'm finding
It
broken
adds up.
things every other day. It all adds up,
Yep.
right? So I think it's important to be aware of that and not always use agility as a claim to do poor quality. I think you do that enough times, then it does show up in business results. So that's the flip side of, I think, sometimes loosening your quality standards and not pushing for something really, really good.
It might take you backwards rather than taking it forward.
I think to close with my thoughts is all the great people and company or products that you look up to, you can trace back a pattern where they would have prioritized craftsmanship over agility. Or to quote Shankar and his famous bio, I think he may have changed it. Aim to build things that stand the test of time, and you don't get there overnight. Great works happen over time and in increments.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
don't
think all of
know.
us agree that there needs to be a balance. It's about how you get to that balance. The I would say the value of the value of the end result, right? So if you move fast with agility, compromising somewhere on quality, if your value is 2x or 3x, if you focus on quality and wait and then ship, your value is definitely 10x for the quality that you put in. So when you have agility as your optimization point, you'll have to ship enough number of times to match up for the quality that someone else is doing. So that's the balance, right? You either ship enough consistently to match that quality, or like build it with enough craftsmanship, thought process, quality going in. But at the same time, you cannot miss out on the train of not shipping. Like nothing that's not shipped is going to add any value. So it has to go out there. When are you going to do it? At what point do you balance? It's a very personal balance, but I think this conversation might have helped like someone out there.
I hope all of you had a great time listening to our thoughts. Like we said, we would like you to think in these direction and pick a choice which suits you and which suits the context of what you're working on. So with that said, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.